If you don't want to go to the nursing home, pack your suitcase and get out of my house." My son Marcus's words echoed against the walls like thunder. For a few seconds, time stopped. His voice, so much like his father's when he was angry, pierced my chest with the same force one uses to shatter a cherished glass. Only this time, I was the glass. I looked at him without responding. His eyes weren't those of the boy who once ran to me with open arms, but those of a man hardened by pride, ambition, and ingratitude. Standing behind him, Tiffany, his wife, watched with her arms crossed, that icy smile always fixed on her face when something pleased her. "Come on, Marcus," she said. "Don't make this more difficult. Your mother will understand. She can't live alone anymore." Your mother. That's what she called me. Not Mama, not my dear old Ellie, just your mother. As if I were a burden, a broken piece cluttering up her immaculate house. I stayed silent, not out of fear or resignation, but because I knew speaking would be useless. I had spent too many years screaming in silence, begging for love with my eyes, hoping for gratitude in a home that was no longer mine. So I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and said calmly, "All right, son, if that's what you want, I'll leave." Tiffany let out a sigh of relief, as if she had just been freed from an uncomfortable obligation. Marcus lowered his gaze, perhaps ashamed, maybe relieved too. I'll never know. I slowly climbed the stairs with a soul heavier than the suitcase I hadn't yet begun to fill. Every step was a memory, the small footprint Marcus left when he was learning to climb, the railing that David, my late husband, had varnished with his own hands, the smell of aged wood and the past. All of it belonged to me, but none of it remained mine. I entered my room and looked around. The mirror reflected a woman with silver hair, deep wrinkles, and a look more exhausted than sad. On the dresser, David's portrait remained in its spot. I picked it up gently, wiped the dust with the edge of my blouse, and murmured, "See what we accomplished, David? A son with his own house, a wife, money, and an empty heart." I pulled the old leather suitcase from the closet. It wasn't large, but it was enough for what was left of my life. I folded each garment with an almost ritual calm. A white blouse, 2 skirts, the shawl my mother had knitted before she passed, and a pair of worn but clean shoes. At the bottom, I placed a small wooden box holding my costume jewelry and the letters David wrote to me when we were young. On top of everything, I put a photo album, the only witness to the years that were fading like autumn leaves. As I closed the suitcase, I heard Marcus and Tiffany laughing in the living room. They were planning a dinner party for that night. Apparently, I was an inconvenience who had to disappear before the guests arrived. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot in my throat. But I didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears had dried up the day I understood that children don't always love as mothers hope. An hour later, I walked downstairs with the suitcase in my hand. Silence filled the house. Marcus stood by the front door, avoiding my eyes. Tiffany, however, wore that expression mixing fake compassion and satisfaction. "Do you have everything, Mom?" Marcus finally asked. I nodded. "Yes, son. Everything I need." "The car will take you to the facility. I already spoke with the administrator. It's a nice place. You'll like it." The facility. Another nice word to disguise abandonment. I watched him in silence, recording every feature of his face, every line of his expression. I didn't want to remember him like this, but the heart doesn't choose what it keeps. When I opened the door to leave, a sound interrupted the tension. The engine of a powerful vehicle stopped right outside the house. Marcus frowned. "What is that?" We walked toward the window. A black town car, gleaming under the afternoon sun, was parked at the curb. The chauffeur, in a dark suit and gloves, stepped out and walked toward me. "Mrs. Eleanor Johnson?" he asked respectfully. "Yes, that's me." "I've come to pick you up. Mr. Elijah Sterling asked me to escort you." The color drained from my son's face. "Elijah Sterling?" he repeated incredulously. "Yes, sir," the chauffeur replied. "He said the madam would know what it's about." I smiled softly. I remembered that name. A man from my past who had marked my youth with tenderness and promises I couldn't fulfill. Fate, capricious as always, brought him back just when life was trying to erase me. Marcus looked confused. Tiffany's mouth was open. "What is going on, Mom?" I picked up my suitcase, took a deep breath, and replied, "Nothing, son. It's just that the assisted living facility waiting for me is much bigger than you imagined." The chauffeur opened the limousine door. Before stepping inside, I turned to Marcus. "Take care of this house. One day you'll understand what you lost." I crossed the threshold without looking back. The sun hit my face, and the wind moved my silver hair. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel old. I felt free. The car door closed, and the engine started with a soft roar. As we pulled away, I saw my son in the rearview mirror, paralyzed on the sidewalk, watching his mother disappear inside a limousine he never could have imagined. I smiled calmly. Fate had just taken its first step. The limousine moved slowly down the road, leaving behind the neighborhood where I had lived for the last 3 decades of my life. I stared out the window without blinking, watching the trees blur and the small houses grow more distant, like memories fading into the distance. The silence inside the car was so deep, I could hear the beat of my own heart. The chauffeur, a man with gray hair and impeccable manners, watched me in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Sterling asked me to take you directly to his residence," he said kindly. "He's very eager to see you." I nodded without saying a word. My throat was tight, as if years of unshed words were stuck there. Elijah Sterling. It had been more than 40 years since I'd heard that name. I loved him when I was 22, a time when life still seemed generous and love was a certainty. But poverty, responsibilities, and irreversible decisions pulled him away from me. I never heard from him again, though sometimes on sleepless nights, his memory visited me with the softness of an old perfume. The car stopped in front of a wrought iron gate. On the other side, a property stretched out, seemingly from another world. Wide gardens, a stone path, a magnificent white house with enormous windows that reflected the sky. The chauffeur got out, opened the door, and offered me his hand. As I stepped onto the ground, I felt I was crossing not just an entrance, but a destiny. A man was waiting at the door. Seeing him, my heart leaped. His hair was completely white, his face etched with wrinkles, but his eyes, those same warm, steady eyes that once promised me the world. "Ellie," he whispered, a sound that pierced my soul. I couldn't move. I just looked at him, trying to recognize, through the shadows of time, the young man who once gave me a flower at the community fair and told me my smile was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Eli," I finally replied. We stood looking at each other for a few seconds, as if the past weighed heavily on us, yet without regret. He took a step toward me and hugged me. Not a hug of passion, but one of recognition, the kind that says, "Finally." "I searched for you for years," he said, his voice trembling. "Why, Eli?" I asked softly. "Time already took care of keeping us apart." "Because there are things time doesn't erase. I heard what happened with your son. I saw the whole thing on the country club newsfeed. A neighbor of mine mentioned it, and when I heard your name, I felt fate knocking on my door again." I lowered my gaze, ashamed, not for having been thrown out, but for the pain of knowing someone else had witnessed my humiliation. He took my hand.